Football has always protected experience. The game's biggest stages are built to expose youth. Stadiums become louder, decisions become heavier, defenders become smarter. Young players are expected to spend years learning how to survive before they can truly dominate. Talent may earn an opportunity, but authority is usually reserved for those who have already proven themselves. That has been one of football's oldest unwritten rules. But every so often, someone arrives who ignores that rule completely. Not because he was too young to understand the pressure, but because he never seemed to acknowledge it in the first place. While experienced defenders tried to intimidate him, he attacked them. While seasoned professionals carefully managed the rhythm of matches, he played with an urgency that forced them into mistakes. He didn't look like a teenager surviving among adults. He looked like an adult who had somehow arrived years too early. Europe wasn't witnessing the rise of another wonder kid. It was witnessing a footballer who had skipped the part where he was supposed to be afraid. Wayne Rooney didn't become extraordinary because he was a brilliant teenager. He became extraordinary because, for a brief moment, Europe discovered there was nothing more dangerous than a teenager who believed he already belonged. Long before Wayne Rooney became England's brightest young star, football had already shaped him into something unusually difficult to intimidate. He grew up in Croxteth, Liverpool, where the game was less about reputation and more about survival. The pitches were rough, the tackles uncompromising, and respect was never handed to the youngest player on the field. If you wanted the ball, you earned it. If you wanted to stay on the pitch, you learned to compete against players who were bigger, stronger, and older. For Rooney, football wasn't an escape from confrontation. It was an education in it. That upbringing left a mark on the way he understood the game. Most teenagers entered professional football trying to avoid mistakes. Rooney entered trying to impose himself. He chased lost causes as though every loose ball belonged to him, challenged experienced defenders without hesitation, and demanded possession in moments when many young players would have hidden. His aggression wasn't reckless. It was conviction. He played as though experience mattered less than the certainty with which you believed your next action would succeed. Long before Europe knew his name, Rooney had already developed the mentality of someone who refused to wait for permission. When Everton promoted him to the first team, that mentality immediately separated him from other academy graduates. Managers usually protect young forwards, giving them limited minutes and carefully chosen responsibilities. Rooney seemed impossible to contain within those limits. Every appearance carried the same relentless energy. He pressed defenders, attacked space, and treated every duel as an opportunity rather than a risk. Then came the famous goal against Arsenal, ending one of the greatest unbeaten runs in Premier League history. The strike announced his talent, but the deeper message was psychological. A 16-year-old had looked at one of England's most dominant teams and behaved as though their reputation carried no weight at all. That was the beginning of Europe's curiosity. Scouts admired his technique, coaches praised his strength, supporters celebrated the goals. But those qualities alone could not explain the feelings surrounding Wayne Rooney. There had been gifted teenagers before him. Very few had carried themselves with such complete authority. And soon, after a remarkable European championship and a move to Manchester United, the rest of the continent would discover that England's newest wonder kid wasn't arriving to learn from Europe's elite. He was arriving to challenge them from his very first night. Wayne Rooney had already become one of England's most exciting young players. His performances at the European Championship were remarkable, not simply because of the goals he scored, but because of the opponents he refused to respect. International tournaments are normally where teenagers discover the difference between youth football and the highest level. Rooney appeared to discover the opposite. Against experienced defenders who had spent years competing at the top of European football, he played with the same aggression, confidence, and directness that had defined him at Everton. For a few unforgettable weeks, Europe wasn't asking who Wayne Rooney might become. It was asking how someone so young could already look this complete. His injury against Portugal made that question even more intriguing. England's momentum faded almost as quickly as Rooney disappeared from the tournament. and suddenly his influence became visible through his absence. The conversations surrounding him changed overnight. He was no longer being described as a promising youngster. He had become the player every major club wanted before his 19th birthday. When Manchester United completed his signing later that summer, they weren't investing in potential alone. They were investing in the rare possibility that one teenager could already influence matches like an established superstar. That expectation would have crushed most young footballers. Old Trafford has never been an easy place for new arrivals, let alone an 18-year-old carrying one of the biggest transfer fees ever paid for a teenager. Every touch would be examined, every mistake magnified, every performance compared to the club's greatest forwards. Yet Rooney never approached Manchester United as though he needed time to grow into the occasion. From his first training sessions, teammates spoke about his intensity. Defenders discovered that he treated practice matches with the same competitiveness as cup final day. Then came his first Champions League night against Fenerbahce. It should have been an introduction to European football. Instead, it became Europe's introduction to Wayne Rooney. For most footballers, a UEFA Champions League debut is an examination. The atmosphere is unfamiliar, the pressure magnified, and every touch carries the weight of expectation. Young players are usually told to keep things simple, avoid unnecessary risks, and grow into the occasion. Wayne Rooney walked onto the pitch against Fenerbahce as though none of those rules applied to him. He wasn't trying to survive Europe's biggest stage. He was trying to own it. From his very first involvement, Rooney played with the authority of someone who believed the match should revolve around him. He demanded the ball under pressure, drove directly at defenders, and attacked spaces that more experienced forwards would have approached with caution. Every action carried conviction. He didn't wait for teammates to dictate the rhythm. He became the rhythm. Fenerbahce's defenders weren't dealing with an 18-year-old discovering elite football. They were dealing with a striker who behaved as though elite football had been waiting for him. That is what made Rooney so unsettling. His physical strength allowed him to compete with seasoned professionals, but strength alone does not explain why defenders struggled. The real problem was psychological. Defenders usually expect young forwards to hesitate before taking responsibility. Rooney never did. He shot when others would pass. He challenged when others would recycle possession. He welcomed contact instead of avoiding it. Every fearless decision forced experienced opponents into unfamiliar territory because they could no longer rely on intimidation as an advantage. The teenager was dictating the emotional terms of the contest. His hat trick that night confirmed what Europe had begun suspecting months earlier. Rooney wasn't exceptional because he was outperforming players his own age. He was exceptional because age had become irrelevant the moment the match began. Experience, reputation, and occasion, the very things football normally uses to slow young players down, seemed to have no effect on him. Europe hadn't simply discovered another wonder kid. It had discovered a teenager who played as though fear belonged to everyone else. His greatest challenge was never proving that he belonged at Manchester United. He did that almost immediately. The real challenge was sustaining that level of influence as the expectations around him continued to grow. Teenage sensations often burn brightly before settling into more predictable careers. Rooney moved in the opposite direction. The fearless teenager gradually became the player Sir Alex Ferguson trusted to solve almost every tactical problem. Striker, second striker, winger, attacking midfielder, even deeper midfield roles later in his career, Rooney accepted them all with the same relentless commitment that had defined him from the beginning. That willingness transformed the players around him. Alongside Cristiano Ronaldo, Carlos Tevez, and later Robin van Persie, Rooney often sacrificed the spotlight so the team could function more effectively. He pressed relentlessly, tracked runners, created chances, and still scored goals at an extraordinary rate. Supporters admired his talent, but teammates valued something even more important. They knew he would never ask anyone else to do work he wasn't prepared to do himself. The teenager who once refused to fear experienced defenders had become the experienced leader younger players looked toward when the pressure became overwhelming. The achievements reflected that evolution. Rooney won multiple Premier League titles, the UEFA Champions League, domestic cups, and eventually became both Manchester United's and England's all-time leading goalscorer for many years. Yet those records only explain what he accomplished. They do not explain what opponents remembered. Managers didn't spend entire weeks preparing for Rooney because of statistics alone. They prepared because his intensity refused to remain in one area of the pitch. He could bully defenders, overwhelm midfielders, press goalkeepers into mistakes, and create opportunities from situations that seemed impossible. Facing Rooney meant preparing for 90 minutes of relentless confrontation. That is perhaps why his early years still feel so extraordinary. The fearless teenager never truly disappeared. He simply grew into a footballer whose courage became responsibility instead of surprise. But beneath the trophies, the leadership, and the records, the same question remained. How many players have ever arrived in Europe already believing they belong there? Wayne Rooney's legacy cannot be measured only through goals, trophies, or records. Those achievements explain how successful he became, but they do not explain why his arrival changed football's perception of young players. Before Rooney, exceptional teenagers were expected to develop patiently. They were protected from pressure, introduced gradually, and given time to mature before carrying the expectations of Europe's biggest clubs. Rooney shattered that assumption. He proved that age and authority were not always connected. Sometimes, a player arrives already prepared for the highest level. That belief would quietly reshape the way football viewed extraordinary young talent. Clubs became more willing to trust teenagers in decisive matches. Supporters began expecting young stars to influence games immediately, rather than simply showing promise. The careers of players who followed, from teenage sensations across Europe to the modern generation of elite prospects, were judged against a standard Rooney helped establish. Not because they copied his style, but because he expanded football's imagination of what a teenager could realistically achieve. Yet what made Rooney unforgettable was never simply his ability. Football has produced many gifted young players. Very few have possessed the same refusal to acknowledge hierarchy. Rooney never looked intimidated by packed stadiums, decorated defenders, or the weight of expectation. He treated every opponent as though reputation expired the moment the referee blew the whistle. That mindset gave him an authority far beyond his years, and it was that authority, not merely his talent, that made Europe struggle to contain him. So when people remember Wayne Rooney, they often remember the spectacular goals, the trophies at Manchester United, or the records that defined his career. But perhaps his greatest achievement came much earlier. He convinced an entire continent that a teenager no longer had to wait his turn. Because football has always believed experience creates confidence. Wayne Rooney arrived and suggested something far more unsettling. Sometimes confidence arrives first, and when it does, even Europe isn't ready for it.